They laughed when she took over the Mafia until she made them disappear one by one. At her father's funeral, they laughed when she tried to speak. 30 days later, every single one of them was either missing or dead. And the woman they silenced was the one who did it. The rain didn't fall gently that day. It poured, like the sky itself was mourning him.
Hi everyone, welcome to my channel.
Black umbrellas filled the cemetery. Expensive suits, cold faces, silent power. At the center of it all, a polished black coffin. Don Vittorio Russo, the most feared man in the city, was now just a name carved into wood. Valentina Russo stood still. No tears, no trembling, just watching. Her long black dress moved slightly with the wind, her face calm, too calm for a daughter burying her father. But this wasn't grief, this was calculation. Behind her, whispers began. She shouldn't even be here. Women don't stand at the front. Where's Marco? He's the one taking over. Valentina heard every word. She just didn't react. A man stepped forward. Marco DeLuca, mid-40s, loud, arrogant, already acting like this throne belonged to him. He adjusted his tie, glanced at the crowd, then at Valentina, and smirked. That smirk didn't reach his eyes. It was worse than disrespect. It was dismissal. "Gentlemen," Marco said, his voice cutting through the rain, "today we bury a legend." A pause. But business doesn't stop for grief. Some of the men nodded. Of course they did. Power never waits. Valentina's fingers tightened slightly, not in anger, in patience. Marco continued. Don Vittorio built an empire, and now it needs strong hands to carry it forward. He stepped closer to the coffin, to protect it, to lead it. Then slowly, he turned and looked directly at her. The message was clear. Not you. A few men chuckled under their breath. One didn't even bother to hide it. A woman lead us? This isn't a fairy tale. Valentina stepped forward. One step. That was all it took for the murmurs to rise. She walked past Marco, past the men, and stood beside her father's coffin. For the first time, she spoke. Softly, but every single person heard it. "You all came here to honor my father." Silence fell instantly. "So I'll speak for him." Marco laughed. Actually laughed. Not loud, but enough. Enough to disrespect her. He leaned closer, voice low, mocking. "This isn't your place, Valentina." And that's when it happened. She turned her head slowly and looked at him. Not angry, not hurt, just cold. "I write," she said quietly. A pause. The rain hit harder. "It's not my place." She glanced at the coffin, then back at him. "Yet." For a second, just 1 second, Marco's smile faded. Something in her tone. It didn't sound like a challenge. It sounded like a promise. But then he scoffed, stepped back, waved her off. "Finish this," he said to the priest. "Let's not turn a funeral into a performance." More laughter, more whispers, more disrespect. Valentina stepped back, silently, gracefully, like she had already accepted defeat. But as the coffin was lowered into the ground and the men began to walk away, she didn't move. Her eyes followed each one of them, counting, memorizing, choosing. And under her breath, barely audible, she whispered, 30 days. The wind carried her words into the storm. No one heard it. No one understood it. But that was the moment everything changed, because the men walking away from that grave thought they had just buried a king. They didn't realize they had just created a queen. The city didn't change after the funeral. It never does. Cars still moved, deals still happened, men still lied, and power still shifted quietly in the dark. But inside one office, everything was already moving. Valentina sat alone, a dimly lit room, floor-to-ceiling windows, rain still tracing slow lines down the glass. On the table in front of her, files, photos, names, every man who had laughed at her. She picked one, Alessandro Ricci, mid-50s, careful, greedy, weak under pressure, a man who smiled too much when Marco spoke. She opened the file. Bank records, hidden accounts, offshore transfers, and one photo, a young woman, not his wife. Valentina tilted her head slightly, not surprised. Men like Alessandro always had something to lose. She reached for her phone, dialed once. It rang only twice. A voice answered. "You don't usually call first." Valentina's lips curved, just barely. "And you don't usually owe me." A pause. Then a quiet chuckle. "Tell me what you need." She looked back at the file, at the photo, at the weakness. "Alessandro Ricci," she said calmly. "I want him nervous." Silence. Then, nervous how? Valentina stood, walking slowly toward the window. Her reflection stared back at her, still, controlled, untouchable. "Not dead," she said softly. "Not yet." A beat. Just enough to make him look over his shoulder and realize he's not as safe as he thinks. Another pause, this one longer. He understood. Consider it done. She ended the call. No hesitation, no second thoughts. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. That same night, Alessandro Ricci's world shifted. It started small. His car wouldn't start. Strange, but not alarming. Then his second phone buzzed. A message. No number, no name, just a photo. Him, leaving a hotel with the young woman. His face drained instantly. He looked around, street empty, air heavy. Another message came in. "Nice evening." His hands began to shake. He dialed a number. No answer. Tried again. Still nothing. By the time he got home, it got worse. His wife was waiting, phone in hand, eyes filled with something far more dangerous than anger. "Who is she?" Alessandro froze. Across the city, Valentina sat in silence, a glass of wine untouched beside her. Her phone buzzed. One message. "He's nervous." She didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She simply whispered, "Good." Then she reached for another file, because this was never about one man. This was a collapse, carefully designed, perfectly timed, and Alessandro Ricci was just the beginning. Morning came quietly, too quietly. Inside the private council room, no one was relaxed. Not anymore. The long wooden table that once echoed confidence now held tension, heavy, unspoken, growing. Alessandro Ricci sat stiffly in his chair, eyes tired, hands restless. He hadn't slept. Couldn't. Across from him, Marco De Luca watched, carefully. "You look like hell," Marco said, leaning back. A few men chuckled, but not like before. This time, it was forced. Alessandro didn't laugh, didn't even respond. That was the first sign. Something was wrong. Marco's eyes narrowed slightly. "Problem?" he asked. Alessandro hesitated. Too long. "No," he said quickly. "Just business." A lie, and everyone in that room felt it. Silence followed. Short, sharp. Then another voice cut in. Luca Moretti. Older, smarter, the kind of man who survived by noticing things others ignored. "Business doesn't shake your hands like that." All eyes turned. Alessandro clenched his fists under the table. "I said I'm fine." But his voice betrayed him. Cracked just slightly. Marco leaned forward now. No more pretending. "If something's wrong," he said slowly, "it concerns all of us. Because that's how power works. One weak link breaks the chain." Alessandro opened his mouth, then stopped, because he didn't know what was worse, telling the truth or whatever would happen if he didn't. And somewhere deep down, he felt it. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was planned. But by who? Across the city, Valentina stood in a quiet art gallery, empty, closed to the public. Paintings lined the walls, beautiful, timeless, power disguised as elegance. She walked slowly, heels echoing softly. Behind her, a man spoke. "You've started something." She didn't turn. "No," she replied calmly. "I've continued something." The man stepped closer, tall, observant, dangerous in a quieter way. "They're already nervous," he said. "One move, and the room is shaking." Valentina stopped in front of a painting, a queen, surrounded by fallen kings. "Good," she said. A pause. "Fear spreads faster than power." The man studied her. "And Marco?" Now she smiled, just a little. "Marco still thinks this is about control." She turned slightly, eyes sharp, focused. "He hasn't realized." A beat. "This is about survival." Back in the council room, the meeting was falling apart. Voices rising, accusations forming, doubt spreading like poison. "If someone is targeting us, then we need to respond. We don't even know who." Marco slammed his hand on the table. Silence. Instant. "Enough." His voice was firm, but something had changed. There was pressure behind it now. "We don't panic," he said. "We find the problem and we remove it." Simple, direct, deadly. But as he spoke, Luca watched him closely, because for the first time, Marco didn't look like a leader. He looked like a man trying to stay in control, and that difference was everything. Outside, a black car pulled up slowly. Inside, Valentina sat in the back seat, watching, waiting. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. "The police are asking questions about one of the shipments." She didn't react, didn't even blink. Just one word. Good. Because now it wasn't just internal fear, it was external pressure, and pressure creates mistakes. She looked out the window, city moving like nothing was wrong. Then she whispered softly, "Let them turn on each other." A pause. It's easier that way. Night fell heavier than usual, the kind of night where silence feels wrong. Inside his mansion, Alessandro Ricci was breaking. Curtains drawn, lights dim, whiskey untouched. His phone sat on the table in front of him, like a loaded weapon. He hadn't received another message. That was the problem, because silence meant one thing now. Whoever was watching didn't need to say anything anymore. He stood abruptly, pacing, sweating, thinking, "I need to fix this." But how do you fix something you don't understand? A sound. Click. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Alessandro froze. His breath quickened. "Hello?" No response. Then a soft sound behind him, not loud, not aggressive, controlled. He turned slowly, and there, in the faint glow of the city light through the window, a figure sat calmly in his chair, waiting, watching. Alessandro's voice cracked instantly. "Who are you?" Silence. Then the figure leaned forward slightly, elegant, unrushed, and stepped into the light. Valentina Russo. His knees nearly gave out. "You..." She raised a finger gently, not to threaten, to silence, and somehow that was worse. "Sit," she said softly. He obeyed. Immediately, because something in her presence felt final. She crossed her legs, composed, like she belonged there. "You've had a difficult 24 hours, she said. Alessandro stared at her, mind racing, heart pounding. "It was you," he whispered. She didn't answer, didn't confirm, didn't deny. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. "Tell me," she said, "how long do you think you would last if everything you've hidden came to light?" His face collapsed, because he knew the answer. "Not long." "Please," he said quickly, I can fix this. I can..." She shook her head once. "No," she said calmly. "You can't." Silence filled the room again, heavy, crushing. Then she leaned closer, and for the first time, there was something dangerous in her eyes. "But I can."
Hope flickered, desperate, ugly. "What do you want?" he asked immediately. There it was, the moment she had been waiting for. Valentina smiled, not wide, not warm, precise. "Loyalty," she said. A pause. "Not to the table." Her voice dropped slightly. "To me." Alessandro didn't even hesitate. "Yes." Too fast, too easy. She noticed. Of course she did. "You'll report everything," she continued. "Every meeting, every decision, every weakness." He nodded quickly. "Yes, anything. And when the time comes," she stood slowly, "you will choose the right side." She turned toward the door, because if you don't, she paused. "Without looking back, I won't need to destroy you." A beat. "You'll do it yourself." And just like that, she walked out. The lights came back on. Alessandro sat frozen, breathing hard, drenched in fear, but alive. Across the city, Valentina stepped into the night air, calm, untouched. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. "The council is meeting again tomorrow. Emergency." She looked up at the dark sky, and for the first time, she smiled fully.
Perfect. Because now, she wasn't outside the table anymore. She was inside it, and none of them knew the man sitting among them belonged to her. The room felt different this time. No laughter, no arrogance, no sense of control, only tension. The council table, once a symbol of power, now felt like a trap. Marco De Luca entered last. That was intentional. Leaders arrive last. But today, no one stood to acknowledge him. That was the first crack. Alessandro Ricci was already seated, still, quiet. But inside, he was unraveling. Because now, he wasn't just afraid, he was owned. The doors shut, locked. Marco took his seat slowly, eyes scanning the room, measuring. "We have a problem." No one argued. "Shipments are being flagged, routes are exposed, and now," he paused, "the police are asking questions." Murmurs spread instantly. That doesn't happen without a leak. Someone is talking, or someone is setting us up. Voices overlapped, tension rising. Marco slammed his hand down. Silence. "We don't guess," he said coldly. "We identify." His eyes moved from one man to another, lingering, testing. And then they stopped. On Alessandro. A beat. Too long. "You've been quiet," Marco said. Every head turned. Alessandro's chest tightened. This was it. The moment fear becomes exposure. "I'm listening," he said, carefully. Marco leaned forward. "You've been off," he continued. "Distracted. A dangerous word. If there's something we need to know—" "There isn't," Alessandro cut in quickly. Too quickly. Silence again. Across the table, Luca Moretti watched everything, eyes sharp, mind working. Because something didn't feel right. Not just with Alessandro, with all of it. Too precise, too coordinated. This wasn't panic. This was design. Back at the head, Marco exhaled slowly. "Fine," he said, but his tone said the opposite. "Then we do this the old way." That got everyone's attention. We tighten control. No independent moves, no private deals. Every action goes through me. Control. Total. And that's when it happened. A quiet voice spoke. That might be the problem. All heads turned. Luca. Marco's eyes darkened slightly. "Explain," he said. Luca leaned back, calm. Too calm. "If someone is targeting us," he said,
They're not attacking randomly. A pause. They're destabilizing leadership. The room shifted, because that idea was dangerous. Marco didn't react immediately, but his jaw tightened. Say what you're trying to say. Luca met his gaze directly. I'm saying, this doesn't look like an attack on us. A beat. It looks like an attack on you. Silence. Heavy. Sharp. And just like that, the room split. Some men looked at Marco, others looked away, because doubt had entered the room. Marco stood slowly. Careful, he said quietly. Not loud, not aggressive, but threatening. Very careful. Luca didn't flinch. If we ignore the pattern, he continued, we lose more than shipments. His voice dropped slightly. We lose control. That word again. Control. Across the table, Alessandro sat frozen, because everything happening was exactly what she wanted. Division, suspicion, cracks. And he knew something they didn't. This wasn't about Marco, it was about her. But he couldn't say it, wouldn't say it, because survival now meant silence. Outside, a black car idled across the street. Inside, Valentina watched the building, calm, focused. Her phone rested in her hand. A message came through, from Alessandro. They're turning on each other. She read it once, then typed back, not yet. A pause. Another message. Push them. She looked up at the building again, eyes steady, unshaken. Then she whispered softly, let's see who breaks first. Back inside, the meeting was no longer controlled. It was unraveling. And Marco, for the first time, didn't look like the man in charge. He looked like a man surrounded by enemies. The meeting ended, but no one left like before. No casual conversations, no confident exits. Just silence and suspicion. Alessandro Ricci walked slowly, careful not to look rushed, careful not to look afraid. But inside, his heart was pounding, because he felt it now. Eyes. On him. And he wasn't wrong. Across the street, inside a parked car, Valentina watched him step out of the building, her gaze steady, unblinking. Her phone buzzed. He's coming out. She didn't respond. She already knew. Because this wasn't observation anymore. This was control. Back on the street, Alessandro reached his car, paused. Something felt off. Too quiet. Then, a voice behind him. You're slipping. Alessandro froze, slowly turned. Luca Moretti. Calm, sharp, dangerous. I don't know what you're talking about, Alessandro said quickly. Luca stepped closer. Not aggressive, just certain. You used to talk more, he said. Now you listen. A beat. That's not growth. His eyes narrowed slightly. That's fear. Alessandro forced a laugh. Weak, unconvincing. We're all under pressure. Luca didn't smile. Pressure reveals things, he said quietly. A pause. Secrets. Loyalties. Alessandro's throat grew dry, because Luca wasn't guessing anymore. He was circling. Be careful who you trust, Luca added later. Then he turned and walked away, leaving those words hanging, heavy. Alessandro stood there for a moment, frozen, then quickly got into his car, locked the doors, and reached for his phone, hands shaking. He typed fast. He's watching me. Across the street, Valentina read the message instantly. No emotion, no panic, just thought. Then she typed back, good. Alessandro stared at the reply, confused, terrified. Another message came in. It means you matter now. His breath caught, because that didn't feel like comfort. It felt like a warning. Then, a third message. You're ready. Ready for what? Before he could respond, his phone rang. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Hello?
Then a voice, low, controlled, familiar, drive. His chest tightened instantly. Where? He asked. A pause. If you need to ask, you're not as loyal as I thought. The line went dead. Alessandro stared at the phone. Because now, this wasn't just fear. This was a test. Across the street, Valentina watched his car, still parked, still unmoving. Her eyes didn't blink. Choose, she whispered softly. Seconds passed. Then, the engine started. A slow smile touched her lips, because he had just made his decision, and he didn't even realize there was no turning back. The city was no longer calm. It just looked like it. Underneath, deals were stalling. Routes were changing. Men were watching their own shadows. And inside the organization, trust was dying. Fast. Marco DeLucas stood at the head of the room again. But this time, he didn't wait. We have a traitor. No buildup, no softness. Just war. The word hit the room like a gunshot. No one spoke. No one moved. Because once that word is said, there's no going back. Marco's eyes scanned the table, slower this time, sharper. Someone is feeding information, he continued, and I'm done waiting for them to make another move. Across the table, Alessandro sat still, too still, because now this wasn't suspicion, this was a hunt. Luca Moretti leaned back slightly, watching, thinking, because something about this still didn't add up. Marco turned and pointed. Him. Every head snapped in the same direction. Not Alessandro. Another man. Franco Bellini. Mid-40s, quiet, low profile. The kind of man no one notices until it's too late. Stand up, Marco ordered. Franco blinked, confused. What? Marco, what is this? Stand up. Slowly, Franco rose. The room tightened. You've been off grid twice this week, Marco said. Your numbers don't match. And somehow, every time something goes wrong, a pause, you're nowhere to be found. Franco shook his head immediately. That's not proof. It's enough. The words were cold, final. Because Marco wasn't investigating anymore. He was making a statement. Power doesn't need proof. It needs control. Two men stepped forward. Franco's breathing changed instantly. Marco, listen to me. This is a mistake. No one moved to help him. Not one. Because in that moment, everyone was thinking the same thing. Better him than me. Across the table, Alessandro felt his chest tighten because he knew the truth. Franco wasn't the traitor. He was just convenient. Luca watched closely, eyes narrowing, because now this was wrong. Too fast, too easy. Marco wasn't solving the problem. He was covering it. Franco struggled as the men grabbed him. You're making a mistake, he shouted. I've been loyal. Marco didn't flinch. Take him, he said. And just like that, Franco Bellini was dragged out of the room, his voice echoing down the hallway. This isn't over. The doors slammed shut. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Marco turned back to the table, adjusted his jacket. Let that be clear, he said calmly. A pause. Anyone who betrays this family ends the same way. No one spoke, no one argued, but something had changed because fear was no longer outside the room.
It was sitting at the table. Across the city, Valentina stood by the window again. Her phone buzzed. A message from Alessandro. Marco is spiraling. People are scared. She read it once. Then she smiled. Not surprised, not impressed, just satisfied. Of course he did, she whispered, because this was the moment she had been building toward, when a leader stops thinking and starts reacting. Another message came in. Luca doesn't believe it. Now that was interesting. Valentina's eyes sharpened slightly. Good, she typed back. A pause. Then another message. Watch him. She lowered the phone slowly, because now the game had changed. Marco was losing control, but Luca was getting closer, and men like him were dangerous. Not because they were strong, but because they were right. Valentina turned back to the window, city lights reflecting in her eyes. Then she whispered softly, maybe it's time I meet him. The cafe was ordinary. That was the point. No guards, no luxury, no obvious power. Just people talking, drinking, living. But inside, nothing about this meeting was ordinary. Valentina Russo arrived first. Of course she did. She chose a corner seat, back to the wall, eyes on the entrance. Not fear, control. She didn't touch the menu, didn't look around, just waited. Then the door opened. A shift in the air, subtle but real. Luca Moretti stepped in. He didn't rush, didn't scan wildly. He already knew she would be watching him, so he simply walked forward and stopped at her table. You're earlier than I expected, he said. Valentina looked up slowly, studied him, like he was a problem she had already solved, but hadn't checked the answer yet. You expected me at all, she replied. A faint pause. Then Luca sat, not invited, not rejected, just accepted. Silence between them, heavy, measuring. Two predators recognizing the same territory. Finally, Luca spoke. You're playing a dangerous game. Valentina tilted her head slightly. That depends on who you think I'm playing against, she said softly. A beat. Luca watched her carefully. Marco thinks there's a leak, he said, but that's not what this feels like. Valentina didn't react, but her eyes sharpened slightly. What does it feel like? She asked. Luca leaned back, studying her now too. Like someone is guiding the chaos, not causing it, shaping it. Silence. That landed closer than he intended. Valentina folded her hands gently on the table. So tell me, she said calmly, why are you really here? Luca didn't answer immediately, because the truth was dangerous. Then, because Marco is losing control. Valentina nodded slightly, as if confirming something she already knew. And? Asked. Luca's eyes didn't move, and someone is taking advantage of it. A beat. Longer now. Valentina leaned in slightly. Just enough. Do you have a name? She asked. Luca held her gaze, and for the first time, there was hesitation, because naming it would make it real. No, he admitted, not yet. Valentina leaned back again, calm, composed. Then you're not here for answers, she said softly. You're here for confirmation. Luca didn't deny it. That alone was enough. A quiet pause followed. Then Luca said something unexpected. You don't feel like a victim in this. Valentina's expression didn't change. Should I? She asked. Luca studied her longer this time. Most people caught in this kind of situation, he said slowly, are already afraid. A pause. You're not. Silence. The moment stretched. Valentina's voice dropped slightly. Fear is for people who don't understand the situation. She leaned in slightly. And I understand everything. Luca's eyes narrowed, because that statement was either arrogance or truth, and he couldn't tell which. A sudden vibration. His phone. He checked it quickly. His expression changed just slightly. Valentina noticed immediately. Of course she did. What is it? She asked calmly. Lucas did slowly. Marco just made another arrest. A pause. And this one he got wrong too. Valentina's eyes sharpened, because now the structure was collapsing faster than expected. She stood as well, smooth, controlled. Then he's accelerating the breakdown, she said softly. Luca looked at her. Or losing his mind, he replied. A beat. Valentina picked up her bag. Same result, she said. She turned slightly toward the exit, then paused, looked back at him. Luca, she said softly. He looked up. Be careful what you choose to understand. A quiet pause. Then she walked out, leaving him alone, but not confused. Thinking. Always thinking. Because now he had seen her clearly, and that was the problem. She wasn't reacting like someone hiding. She was reacting like someone waiting for the end game. Across the city, Valentina stood by the window again. Her phone buzzed. A message from Alessandro. Marco is spiraling. People are scared. She looked at it, then typed. Good. Another message. What now? She stopped walking, looked up at the city, and smiled faintly. Now, she whispered, we let him finish it himself. The city felt louder now. Not in sound, but in pressure. Something had shifted. And everyone felt it, even if they couldn't name it. Inside Marco De Luca's office, the air was different, thicker, angrier. He wasn't sitting, he was pacing, fast, sharp, uncontrolled. On the table, reports, files, names, too many names, and none of them made sense anymore. This is impossible, Marco muttered. He stopped pacing, stared at the documents. Another mistake, another wrong arrest, another dead end. Each one worse than the last. And worse, each one making him look weaker. That was the real threat. Not betrayal, not leaks. Loss of authority. The door opened. Luca Moretti stepped in. Calm as always, but his eyes said otherwise. You've made it worse, Luca said immediately. No greeting, no respect, just truth. Marco turned sharply. I've removed threats, he snapped. Luca didn't blink. You've removed distractions, he corrected. A pause. That landed. Hard. Marco's jaw tightened. People were lying, he said. I acted. Luca stepped closer. You reacted, he said quietly. There's a difference. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Then Luca said it. The thing no one else dared to say. The structure is collapsing because you're chasing shadows. Marco's eyes darkened. So what do you suggest? He asked coldly. Luca didn't hesitate. Stop. A beat. Just one word, but it filled the room. Marco laughed once. Dry. Empty. Stop, he repeated. While someone is tearing this apart from the inside? Luca held his gaze. You don't even know there's someone, he said. That's the problem. Silence again. But this time, Marco didn't answer immediately. Because somewhere deep down, he knew Luca was right, and that terrified him more than any enemy. Across the city, Valentina stood in a high-rise suite, night returning, city glowing beneath her, alone, still, perfectly composed. Her phone buzzed. Alessandro. He's losing control completely. The council is divided. She read it slowly, then walked toward the window. Divide further, she replied. Almost instantly, his response came. They're starting to question you indirectly. Now that made her pause. Not fear. Interest. She turned slightly, thinking, calculating, then typed, let them. A pause. Then another message. Luca is asking questions. Valentina's eyes sharpened instantly. A beat. Then she smiled. Not warm, not soft, strategic. Of course he is, she whispered, because Luca wasn't like the others. He wasn't breaking, he was connecting, and that made him dangerous. Back at the council building, Marco stood alone in the room now. Everyone had left, except him, and silence. He stared at the empty chairs, then whispered, "Who are you?" But no answer came. Only the feeling that something unseen was already sitting at the table, watching him fall apart, and guiding it. Night didn't bring peace anymore. It brought clarity. And for Luca Moretti, clarity was dangerous. He sat alone in a dim office, files spread across the table, silent phones, city noise faint through the glass. But his mind? Too loud. Every incident, every arrest, every wrong accusation. He wasn't just reviewing events. He was tracing patterns. And patterns don't lie. Luca leaned forward slowly, pulled one file closer, then another. Names, dates, locations. At first, random. But then, something formed. A rhythm. Too precise to be chaos. "No," he muttered. He leaned back, eyes narrowing, because now he saw it. Not who was being attacked, but how. Every failure created tension. Every arrest created fear. Every fear created division. And every division weakened Marco. Not the council, not the organization. Marco. Luca stood slowly. "This isn't collapse," he whispered. A pause. "It's targeting." Across the city, Marco was no longer pacing. He was sitting, still, staring at a single document. A list of internal arrests, all verified, all justified. But now, he wasn't sure anymore. For the first time, doubt wasn't coming from others. It was coming from him. His phone rang. He answered instantly. "Speak." Silence on the line. Then Alessandro's voice, careful, low. "They're starting to ask about patterns." Marco's grip tightened. "What patterns?" he snapped. A pause. "The failures," Alessandro said. "They think someone is guiding them." Marco's expression darkened. "Who?" he demanded. Another pause, longer this time. "Luca is close," Alessandro admitted. Silence. That name again. Luca Moretti. Marco stood instantly, chair scraping hard against the floor. "Where is he?" Marco asked sharply. "I don't know," Alessandro replied, "but he's asking the right questions." Marco ended the call without another word. But now, something had shifted inside him. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was direction. And it needed a target. Meanwhile, Valentina sat in the same high-rise suite. But tonight, she wasn't alone in thought. Her phone buzzed repeatedly. Alessandro. Luca is mapping everything. If he connects it fully. She didn't even let him finish. She typed, "He won't." Instant reply. "How can you be sure?" Valentina stood, walked slowly across the room, calm, measured, then typed, "Because certainty creates urgency." A pause, then another message, "And urgency makes mistakes." Across town, Luca placed the final file on the table. Everything now aligned. He whispered, "It's not Marco." A beat. He's being used. And then the final connection clicked into place. Not Marco, not Alessandro, not the council. Someone else. Someone who never showed force, never demanded control, only shaped outcomes. Luca's eyes darkened. Valentina. He said the name quietly. testing it. And the moment he did, it felt real. Too real. Because now everything made sense. Too much sense. And that's when he realized the danger wasn't just discovering her, it was being right about her. Luca didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, staring at the board of connections in front of him, because once a name is spoken, it can't be unspoken. Valentina. He said it again, quieter this time, more certain. And now it wasn't theory anymore. It was direction. He stood slowly, picked up his coat. No hesitation, no doubt left. Because if he was right, then everything else was already too late. Across the city, Marco De Luca wasn't thinking. He was deciding. And that was far more dangerous. The council room was full again, but this time, it didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like judgment. Marco stood at the head of the table, eyes cold, voice sharper than before. I know who it is now. Silence dropped instantly. Even Alessandro froze. Marco continued. The one behind the instability, the one feeding chaos. A pause. It's not inside the council. That got everyone's attention. Marco leaned forward slightly. It's external. Murmurs spread. Confusion. Fear. Then Marco said it. Valentina Russo. The room shifted instantly. Some men laughed nervously. Others didn't breathe. Alessandro's face went pale. Because that name was not supposed to be spoken yet. Not this way. Not publicly.
People are always hurt when systems change, she said softly, a beat. The only difference is whether it's random, she stepped slightly closer, or necessary. Luca exhaled slowly, because that was the divide, morality versus design. You're not stopping this, he said. Valentina didn't deny it. Instead, neither are you. Silence. Then she added something quieter. But you can decide how far it goes. That same hour, everything changed. A coordinated operation began. Silent arrests, asset seizures, blocked routes. But it wasn't clean. It was aggressive, messy, desperate, and worst of all, inaccurate. Men who had nothing to do with Valentina's network were taken in. Businesses collapsed overnight. Panic spread. And in the chaos, someone important disappeared. Not arrested, not tracked, just gone. Alessandro stood alone in a dark room, phone vibrating non-stop, messages flooding in. This is going too far. Marco has lost control. People are turning. His hands shook slightly, because now, this wasn't strategy anymore. It was collapse, and collapse has no loyalty. Luca stood beside Valentina again, but this time he looked different, more certain, less hesitant. You let him do it, he said. Valentina didn't react. Yes. A pause. Luca stepped closer. Why? She finally looked at him directly. Because now everyone sees what he is, a beat, and what he is will justify what comes next. Luca understood instantly. This wasn't just manipulation, it was exposure, controlled destruction. He exhaled slowly. You're not playing against Marco, he said. Valentina's expression didn't change. No. A pause. Marco was never the goal. Silence. Heavy. Final. Luca whispered, "The system?" Valentina nodded once. Always the system. The city didn't feel safe anymore, not even in daylight. People still went to work, cars still moved, phones still rang. But underneath it all, everyone was listening for something. Bad news. The council building was chaos. Not loud chaos. Worse.
controlled panic, men speaking over each other, orders being questioned, messages contradicting each other, and Marco DeLuca was no longer commanding it, he was chasing it. "I said all routes," Marco snapped. A man at the table shook his head quickly. "They're already rerouting. Someone inside is reversing our orders." That line hit harder than expected. Marco froze. "Someone inside," he repeated slowly, because now it wasn't outside influence anymore. It was infiltration, and that meant something had gone terribly wrong. Across the city, Luca Moretti stood alone in silence, phone in hand, screens open, connections mapped. And now the final pattern emerged. Not random disruption, not Marco's paranoia, not council instability. It was structure, deliberate structure. "She didn't just weaken him," Luca whispered. A pause. "She isolated him." His eyes narrowed, because every failure, every arrest, every false lead had one effect. Marco was now alone in his decisions, completely. And that was dangerous, because isolated leaders make irreversible choices. Alessandro's phone buzzed, once, then again, then again. He stared at it, frozen. Unknown number. Finally, he answered. "Hello?" Silence. Then a voice, weak, hoarse. "They used me." Alessandro's breath stopped. "Franco?" he whispered. A pause. Then, "It wasn't Marco's decision," the voice said. "It was made to look like it." Alessandro's grip tightened, because that changed everything. If Marco wasn't choosing the wrong targets, someone was making him. Luca stood across from Valentina again, but this time the air felt different, less tension, more understanding. "Franco is alive," Luca said. Valentina nodded. "I know." That simple answer again, always knowing, never surprised. Luca studied her carefully. "You didn't kill him," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "Would that have been more efficient?" Silence. Luca exhaled slowly. "You're not eliminating people," he said. "You're rearranging perception." A pause. Valentina finally smiled faintly. Perception is reality. Back at the council, Marco stood alone at the front of the room, everyone watching him now, not following, watching, and that was new. "We end this tonight," he said. A pause. "Valentina Russo is to be eliminated." Silence. But this time, it wasn't agreement, it was hesitation, fear, doubt, because the word eliminates had become too final, too exposed, and Marco noticed. For the first time, he noticed. His authority wasn't just weakening, it was evaporating. Luca stood silently later that night, watching the city, and he finally understood it completely. Valentina wasn't building a throne, she was dismantling the idea that anyone else could sit on one. And Marco was already finished. He just didn't know it yet. Valentina stood at her window, city lights below, calm as ever. Her phone buzzed. Alessandro. He's about to declare war publicly. She read it, slowly, then typed, "Good." Another message came instantly. "Luca is changing." She paused, looked into the distance, then whispered, "So am I." Morning came with silence, but it wasn't peace, it was anticipation, the kind that sits before something breaks. A convoy of black vehicles pulled up in front of the building. Cameras, reporters, guards. This wasn't a council meeting anymore. This was exposure. Marco DeLuca stepped first, expression locked, jaw tight, eyes burning with conviction. He walked to the podium without hesitation. Flashes erupted immediately. He raised a hand. Silence followed. For too long, this city has been infiltrated from the shadows. A pause. We have allowed a single influence to destabilize order. Reporters leaned in. Then he said it clearly. Valentina Russo. The name hit the air like a weapon. No whisper now, no suspicion, public accusation. Across the city, Luca Moretti stood in front of a screen, watching live, expression unreadable. Because now, this wasn't strategy anymore. It was exposure at scale, and exposure removes control. He whispered, he did it. Not surprised, almost expected, but still dangerous. Because once public war begins, it stops being contained. Valentina sat alone, same calm posture, same steady breath, same controlled silence. Her phone buzzed nonstop.
Alessandro, it's public. Marco has gone public. Another message, they're freezing your assets. Another, people are panicking. But she didn't move. She only read. Then finally typed, let them speak. Pause. Then another message, Luca is still watching everything. This time, she paused longer. Then, good. Within hours, everything shifted. Businesses cut ties, alliances broke. Men chose sides too quickly, or too late. Fear became currency, and Marco thought he had won momentum, but he had actually done something else. He had made her real. Luca stood in silence, watching the chaos unfold. Then he picked up his phone, opened a contact, Valentina. Finger hovered, because this was the line. Not strategy anymore, not observation, choice. And before he could hesitate further, the phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. Silence. Then Marco's voice. You've been quiet, Luca. Luca didn't respond immediately. Marco continued. I need to know where you stand. A pause. And this time, Luca answered carefully. With the truth. Silence. That answer was not what Marco wanted. Valentina stood slowly, walked toward the window. City alive below, but not stable. Fragmenting. She finally spoke aloud. Public declaration. A faint smile. Now there's no turning back. Her phone buzzed again. Alessandro. Marco is preparing a strike team. She read it, calmly, then replied, let him. Pause. Then one more message. Luca didn't choose Marco. That made her stop, just for a second. Then she whispered, of course he didn't. Because Luca was no longer choosing sides. He was choosing understanding. And that was the most dangerous path of all. Night fell like a curtain being dropped too fast. No warning, no mercy, just darkness. And with it, movement. 3 black vehicles moved through the city. No lights, no noise, just purpose. Inside, armed men. Controlled silence. Orders repeated in whispers. Marco De Luca wasn't watching from afar anymore. He was inside it. Confirm location, he said coldly. A voice responded, target residence identified. Marco didn't hesitate. Move. Across the city, Luca Moretti saw the pattern instantly. Too clean, too fast, too emotional. His eyes widened slightly. No, he whispered, because this wasn't strategy. This was reaction. And reaction under pressure creates collateral damage. He grabbed his coat instantly. This is wrong, he said under his breath, and he moved. Valentina stood inside her apartment, still, calm, almost serene. She already knew. The silence outside wasn't peace. It was approach. Her phone buzzed again. Alessandro, they're close. She didn't reply. She simply walked toward the window and looked down. Cars arriving, men exiting, positioning. She whispered softly, finally. Not fear, not panic. Expectation.
The front door exploded inward, controlled breach. Professional. Men entered fast, silent, coordinated. Clear, move, target is inside. But the apartment was already empty. Too empty. One man stepped forward, confused. She's not here. Then, a voice behind them. Calm, soft. I wouldn't stand there. They turned instantly. Valentina, standing in the hallway, unarmed, unshaken, and somehow that was worse. Luca arrived at the building moments later. Too late. Always too late. He pushed through the entrance. Chaos upstairs. Radio chatter. Confusion. He ran. In a separate vehicle, Marco De Luca heard it. Target located. Then, wait, she's here. A pause. Then panic. She's not resisting. She's talking to them. Marco's grip tightened. What? Valentina stood facing the armed men. Calm, composed. You were sent here for certainty, she said softly. No one fired, not yet, because certainty wasn't what they felt anymore. Confusion was. She stepped forward slightly. Tell Marco, she continued, he's already lost. One man raised his weapon, unsteady. Then, Luca burst into the room. Stop! Silence. Instant. He saw her. She saw him. And everything froze. Luca stepped between them, breathing hard, eyes locked on Valentina. This is what you wanted? He asked. Valentina didn't look away. No, she replied softly. A pause. This is what happens when fear is given authority. Luca's jaw tightened. Behind him, armed men unsure, waiting. Then Luca said it. If I walk away, they shoot you. Valentina tilted her head slightly. No, she said calmly. A beat. They won't. And she was right, because no one fired. Not yet. Because something had shifted. The power in the room was no longer Marco's or theirs. It was hers. Luca lowered his voice. You let this happen. Valentina finally stepped closer. I guided it here. A pause. Now you understand the difference. Silence. Then Luca whispered, What comes next? Valentina's eyes darkened slightly. Choice. The silence after chaos is always the loudest. In that apartment, no one moved, no one spoke. Even breathing felt risky. Valentina stood still. Luca stood between her and the armed men. And everything hung on a decision no one wanted to make. Luca didn't look away from Valentina. Not once. You knew I'd come, he said quietly. Valentina met his gaze, calm, unshaken. I hoped you would. A pause. That answer hit differently. Not manipulation, not denial. Truth. Luca exhaled slowly. People are going to die if this continues. Valentina tilted her head slightly. People have already died, she corrected softly. Silence. Behind them, the armed men waited for instruction, but none came, because no one was in control anymore, not even Marco. In a separate vehicle, Marco De Luca was no longer calm. He was breathing too fast, too sharp. Why hasn't she been taken out? He snapped. A voice on the radio answered nervously. Sir, Luca is on site. Silence. Then, Marco's expression changed. Not anger, something worse. Realization.
Luca, he whispered, because now it wasn't just rebellion, it was alignment. And Marco had just become the outsider in his own war. Back in the apartment, Valentina finally turned slightly, not away from Luca, just enough to shift the balance. Do you know what Marco did wrong? She asked softly. Luca didn't answer. She continued anyway. He tried to control fear. A pause. Fear can't be controlled. Her eyes sharpened. It can only be directed. Luca frowned slightly. Directed toward what? He asked. Valentina looked at him fully now, and for the first time, there was something almost human in her expression. Toward truth. Silence. That word landed heavily. Truth. Not power, not revenge, not control. Truth. Luca slowly stepped aside. Not fully, not completely, but enough. The armed men immediately tensed, finger movement on triggers. Valentina didn't flinch. She just watched Luca, carefully. "You're not stopping them," she said softly. Luca's voice dropped. "I'm not saving you either." A beat. "I'm choosing what happens next." Valentina studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "That's all I ever asked." Outside, Marco arrived, finally. He stepped out of the vehicle, seeing the building, seeing movement, hearing radio static. Then, he saw Luca inside, and something inside Marco snapped. "Traitor," he whispered, because in his mind now, Luca wasn't confused. He was betrayal, and that misunderstanding would end everything. Luca turned slightly. He could feel it, something changing outside. Valentina noticed too. "He's here," she said softly. Luca's voice dropped. "I'm not saving you either." A beat. "I'm choosing what happens next." Valentina studied him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. "That's all I ever asked." The night after everything feels different. Not peaceful, just emptied. The city is still standing, but something inside it has shifted permanently. Inside the apartment, lights were still on, but no one felt safe under them anymore. Valentina stood near the window. Luca stood a few steps behind her, and the armed men had lowered their weapons. Not because they were ordered to, but because no one was certain who to obey anymore. That's how control dies. Quietly. Luca finally spoke. Low. Controlled. It didn't have to go this far. Valentina didn't turn. "It never has to," she replied softly. A pause. "It only does when people refuse to see what's already broken." Luca stepped closer. "Marco is finished," he said. Valentina nodded once. No surprise, no satisfaction, just acknowledgement. "Yes," she said. That simplicity was unsettling, because there was no victory in her tone, only completion. Across the city, Marco de Luca sat alone in a dim room. No counsel, no radio, no orders. Just silence. He wasn't surrounded anymore. He wasn't followed anymore. He wasn't even feared anymore. He had become irrelevant, and he knew it. "She didn't destroy me," he whispered. A pause. "She removed the need for me." That realization hit harder than defeat, because power can survive resistance, but it cannot survive replacement. Back in the apartment, Luca watched Valentina carefully now, not as a threat, not as a suspect, but as a structure. "This was never about taking control," he said quietly. Valentina turned slightly, finally facing him. "No," she confirmed. A pause. "It was about exposing what control actually is." Luca narrowed his eyes. "And what is it?" Valentina stepped away from the window, slow, calm. "A belief people agree to." Silence. That answer wasn't emotional. It wasn't criminal. It was philosophical. And that made it more dangerous. The armed men began to leave slowly. No orders, no resistance, just uncertainty dissolving into retreat. Because when leadership disappears, obedience follows. And no one wanted to be the last one standing in a collapsing system. Luca stepped closer again, his voice lower now. "What happens now?" Valentina looked at him for a long moment, not calculating, not hiding, just present. Then she said, "Now nothing is being built." A pause. "Only understood." Luca frowned slightly. "And me?" he asked. Valentina held his gaze, longer this time,
Then, softly, "You were never part of the war." A beat. "You were the mirror." Silence. Because that was the truth he hadn't considered. Outside, the city continued, as if nothing happened. But inside its structure, everything had already changed. Valentina turned back to the window. Luca didn't stop her, because there was nothing left to stop, only understanding left to reach. And somewhere far away, a new system was already beginning, quietly, unseen, inevitable.